Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am Kelsey from Smartling, and I have with me here today, we have Sonia Kiro from Contentstack. She is the global head of product marketing calling in today from the Netherlands. We have Ellie Finkelstein, who is the CEO and founder of Constructor, calling in from the Pacific Northwest. We have Ryan Seuss, who is the customer success team lead here at Smartling, calling in from the Jersey Shore. So welcome, everyone. We are really pleased to have you here today, and we are going to kick things off with a poll. So first, we are curious to know, how does your global strategy break down? And this will just help give us an idea kind of everyone's strategy and the way we're going to talk about different approaches today. So go ahead and weigh into the poll, and we will launch those results in a moment. Okay, let's see. Okay, Sonia, what do you make of these poll results?
I can actually not see them, Kelsey, so maybe you can help me. Oh, there we go. Now I can. Oh, I'm very glad that nobody is going my continent, because as we're going to look into the topics, that would be really, really scary. Country, language, region is or can be a good balance, depending on what that local execution looks like. Nobody's going hyperlocal. I wonder why that is. Let's explore the possibilities of that.
Yeah, okay. Let's keep going. This is just a quick run through of the agenda for today. We're going to talk about trends and urgency and why going from global to multi-local is important. Then the new way of localization and translation, and driving local revenues with personalization. So with that, I will toss it over to Sonia. And if you have questions throughout, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A and we will address them at the end.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kelsey. Yeah, and do ask questions. Let's keep this as interactive as possible. We're here to really answer your questions and provide guidance wherever possible. So moving from global to multi-local, it is really amazing how different the local audiences and the local preferences and emotions attached to products and brands really are. I live in the Netherlands. I'm German, and for many, certainly American ears, if the Dutch or the German speak, it'll sound pretty much similar, which please do not ever tell a Dutch person. If you look at how close we are in proximity, you know, there's Germany, and then there's that tiny bit that is the Netherlands. You would think we are pretty much alike. We kind of also look alike. We dress mostly alike, although the Dutch have a strange thing with orange pants. And yet we could not be more different in the way that we behave as customers and consumers. I spoke to my dad the other day, who, you know, is my family, who raised me in Germany, and you would think the two of us are culturally really close. And he was en route back from visiting me back to his home in Germany, and stopped in one of the beautiful cities in between to you know, get a bit of a Dutch vibe. He was in a parking garage, and he paid his parking ticket, and he went to the barrier, and it opened by itself. He called me very excited and said, "Oh my God, you won't believe what just happened. I paid the parking ticket, I went to the barrier, and it opened by itself." I'm thinking excitement, dad is in a happy place, right? I'm like, I know, isn't that great? You can totally save yourself rolling down the window and awkwardly kind of leaning out of your car, which by the way tells you how lazy I am. And I was super excited about the convenience that is, like, by the way, totally state of the art in the Netherlands and not at all in Germany. My father, however, was not excited out of joy, but excited because he was really, really upset. His questions were, who is storing this data? Who knows my number plate now? Who knows that it is my car? How long is that going to be stored? And is there any other where in the Netherlands where you guys check how I'm moving about? So here I am sitting experiencing the very same situation, and I'm happy and I'm thinking about convenience, but with that German, very privacy orientated mindset and slightly older demographic that my father is bringing in, he is really, really frustrated and actually quite offended that his personal sphere was intruded. So differences are really, really important. Now, many of you here in the audience work in global organizations, and it's really easy for us to think about how can we streamline our processes, how can we roll out products and campaigns and content marketing on a global level. But what happens when we do is that we miss the nuances, big and small, when we talk to our local audiences. And being local matters more today than it did 2 years ago. The pandemic has forced all of us into little bubbles and has rekindled a trend in the consumers to want to shop and want to buy local. 54%, more than half of US online adults say that they would prefer to buy products made in the US. And that's a consistent trend, at least half, no matter where you look in North America or in Europe. And 42% agree they would rather shop at small local stores than big national chains and brands. That is really frustrating statistics here. If you've been building your brand image, if you've been working on global marketing for the past 5 years, 10 years digitally, and then you hear, wait a second, they'd rather go around the corner. But that's what the pandemic has done, and that is how it has also changed our habits in how we want to be approached by brands as a consumer. Now, we can't all be local, but what we can do is a better job at understanding local and understanding how to behave in a local way. If you look across Europe, then Europeans care very much about how you as a brand help local communities, help with sustainability, help with more soft elements of the brand experience. More than half of both UK and US online adults also agree that they're always willing to try a new brand. Now, in a world where it is really easy to stand up a digital native brand, where it is surprisingly easy to work out the supply chain, that is a lot of potential for disruption of big multinational brands that might be established to be, sidelined by local smaller brands that really resonate. What do you need to do to go from that global mindset to a multi-local mindset? And I think it is really important that we take the time to talk about the fact that technology is not necessarily the challenge here. The change in mindset from headquarters, if it is a globally organized organization, to enable local trust and local autonomy, really internally inside your organization, is the first very, very important step. And that means you need to really open up to a truly global mindset and help people understand the differences that you have across your international target audiences. There is a lot to be said for just connecting your global teams with people in the local teams, and talk to them and understand what drives them and understand their way of thinking, to help you understand how also your customers would react. We're doing a great program at Contentstack. It's called Contentstack Connects, where we get half an hour every week to speak to someone from another country, just to get to know them, not work, just to get to know them. But it really has shown that it helps the company as a whole to understand how beautiful also the diversity and the differences are. And then it is really critical, if we could go back one, Kelsey, it is really critical that you build your organization in a way that a global headquarters serves local execution and trusts the local teams, gives them the autonomy to execute with what they know is best because they are in that environment, and then continuously iterate, innovate. Local brand elements are important. McDonald's is a great example where in the US it's all red, in Europe it's all green. Local localized product portfolio too. If you've never been to Europe in a McDonald's, I know when you go to France, you don't want to go to McDonald's, but next time you're there, promise me you do, because you won't recognize half of the menu on there because it's very specific to local cuisine. I need to giggle that I use the word cuisine with McDonald's. And then embrace the agility with small cross-functional teams, right? Give your local teams pods, give them dedicated staff in your IT teams, dedicated staff in your content and marketing teams, so that they can also execute with that trust and that autonomy that you have given them. And digital, of course, is a critical part in that. We are in that digital first world. If we can transition to the next slide, please. That the most important step for you to look at is how do you sync local offline and online experiences? Because it is really strange if your local staff that is in branches or that is in your stores understands local and responds to that, but your brand as a whole in the digital world does not. You need to have insights-driven personalization with that, because even if you have beautiful personas that you worked out, they still manifest in very different ways and very different interests and triggers in your local audiences. And Eli is going to show us how he can help with that. And then really create that emotional content that adapts to consumers in the local touchpoints. And there, what you need is atomic content, really the ability to have a whole library of content that Ryan is going to show us how you best get that localized, but that you can then also in real time assemble based on the insights-driven personalization to really matter to that local audience. And that could even be hyperlocal depending on how you set that up. Here's where technology does come in though. If you're working with an old school monolithic digital experience environment, all of that is really, really hard because you don't have the granularity, you don't have the agility and flexibility that you need to go away from the global approach to that multi-local approach. That starts with just, having the proximity technologically, that starts with not having the ability to have those atomic content fragments, assembling them in real time, but that often also means you don't have an ability to adapt the workflows and the organizational processes the way you need for your specific operating model. So what you really need to do and need to think about is how do you deconstruct that monolith, and how do you move into what the analyst world like Gartner here likes to call composable architectures that will allow you to get into a technology mindset that maps your business processes, and you don't need to any longer map your business processes to what a big vendor tells you to do. Ryan, I think you're going to talk to us a little bit more about how localization and translation can help with that.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Anya. That was very, very insightful. As this slide says, I'm going to talk to you about a new way of localization and translation. And when you see that, please don't be scared. It's just more of what you've already been doing in a more refined way. So Kelsey, if you don't mind moving ahead. So I'm going to talk about 3 considerations during your translation process in order to hyper-localize your content or go to a more multi-local strategy. So I have 3 considerations. I know any loc manager on this call or marketing person tasked with localization or product person tasked with localization or company founder or anybody else can tell you that there are way more than 3 considerations of this process, but I'm going to focus on 3 today. So the first focus is the idea of transcreation. We're all familiar with translation. We all see it all the time, and it's just taking one language from another. It's been going on for thousands of years, from Gilgamesh to the point where this latest iPhone update allows you to take a picture and click a word on your screen and translate it into a different language. It's pretty magical, if you ask me. Translation, though, typically sticks to the source content. It tries not to deviate too much. You try to say the same thing in that target language. The process of transcreation differs a little bit as it allows your language expert, your linguist, to have a bit more creative freedom when taking the content from one language to another. Typically, transcreation is found with marketing content, customer-facing content, things with calls to action, maybe slogans, advertisements. There's often a goal with the content that we put through transcreation to keep the message or more of the intent behind the source text as opposed to keeping the literal source text in a different language. We want to produce or transcreate that source content in a way that it will have the same impact, whether that be emotional, whether that be driving a customer to an action, to the native speakers of the target languages. Some examples, if you look at the most popular company slogans in the world, and for our second McDonald's reference of the day, you see things like, I'm loving it, you see, just do it. As you can imagine, literal translations here may be taboo. It may not even make sense in other parts of the world. You know, when I was looking at some of those slogans, when I did a quick Google search, I was thinking to myself, I don't think America runs on Dunkin' will work too well in Sweden, right? So this is where transcreation comes into play. We actually have tools called transcreation tools. It's a more advanced form of the CAT tool that translators typically work in, where our language experts can go in and provide multiple transcreation options along with back translations, which are more literal translations of whatever they're putting in that target transcreation, so they can collaborate with any organization. So I am monolingual, I only speak English. And let's say my company slogan is hello world. In a different language, if I translate that literally, it might just say hello earth in a different language. It might not really make sense. So I'd be able to work with somebody who's translating into, say, Spanish to come up with a translation that says maybe hello everyone, welcome all, something along those lines. And even without those target language resources within my organization, we can still collaborate with our linguists and our language experts to get that same message across via transcreation. Now, one word I just said, sorry, Kelsey, if you don't mind jumping back. So one word I just said was very key, and that is collaborate. So I'm going to combine these next two items, next two considerations into one topic, which is working with quality translators and collaborating with them, which is often done via linguistic assets inside of TMSs. So first, let's hit on the point of quality in translation. Quality is pretty subjective, right? Sonia might say something, Ellie might say something, I might say something, all in English, and it will all make sense, but we might say the same thing with the same meaning in very different ways. However, as a marketer, when I'm thinking about the words that I'm putting out there in my digital content landscape, I need to ask myself who I'm targeting and how I want to actually speak to them. So I have a good quick story about this. So I'm from Staten Island, New York, for anybody who's familiar. And my friend works in advertising, and they were rolling out this product that allows you just to use Apple Pay to board a public transportation in Staten Island. And he texted me and he said, hey, we're rolling this out where you're from. Would you say on Staten Island or in Staten Island? And while that single letter might look like a really, really small change, it's super significant. Because as a native Staten Islander, if I saw this is coming, you can use it in Staten Island, I would feel like they're just swapping Staten Island out with another city, another town, whatever it may be. Because you say in Manhattan, in Brooklyn, in the Bronx, but you say on Staten Island if you're from Staten Island. So to me, that made me look like they actually cared and put thought into it. And it led me to really believe in those advertisements more. Now, how does this relate to translation? In translation, we want to do the same thing, right? We want to drive the same thought I had about my friend's advertisement using on Staten Island, we're able to communicate this with our translators via linguistic assets. There are two main components of linguistic assets: your style guide and your glossary. I could spend an hour, multiple hours talking about them, but I won't go too crazy right now. But style guides, you can actually change between locales. So if you have one target in Japan and you have one target in Germany, you can create different style guides to let the translators know what tone, what audience you're trying to hit in each of those markets. You can even make it more specific based on the locale. Is your target market in Spain who speaks Spanish different from your target market who speaks Spanish in Argentina? All of that can be relayed, or excuse me, how you want to convey your message to those different audiences in different locations can be conveyed through your style guide and through your glossary, where you can give preferred translations, you can give do not translate rules and things along those lines. Look, dealing with any LSP, the key is communication, in my opinion. We likely will not get translations right, absolutely 100% perfect the first time, but the idea is to have a open feedback loop throughout your translation process in order to tweak things every single time something fully goes through the translation process. At Smartling, I know we ask for feedback early and often, and we're always open to critiques or commentary as long as we're working together in an open platform. All right, Kelsey, if you don't mind moving ahead. Thanks. All right, so just to recap and how to pick up the pace here, because you might hear all that and say, hey, that sounds like a lot of effort, sounds like it's going to take a lot of time. We have a lot of tools to pick up the pace. Translation memory. If you transcreate something once, it will be saved in your TM and you can use it again. Even if it's a similar but not exactly the same, the translator will see that message, that previously translated version of the string, and be able to mix and match as needed. One hot topic right now is machine translation. To be honest, it's not really great for creative translation, but it's getting better. So something like an MT post-edit workflow or a new tool that we're developing actually allows you to insert glossary terms in machine translated strings. So more to come there, but machine translation, not necessarily right now, but in the near future. I already mentioned the transcreation tool and linguistic assets, which are great tools to have in place on the platform. And then it's not always about picking up the pace, but it's also having that open line of communication again. Having a service level, SLA with your LSP, a lot of acronyms there, and setting expectations accordingly really go a long way. I compare this to going to Disney World, where you can see that you have 30 minutes left in your wait for Space Mountain versus just waiting on a line and you have no idea how long it's going to take. If you have that communication, it feels a lot better and you know you're getting closer and closer to your goal. All right, one last super quick story from me. Kelsey, if you don't mind moving ahead. So I have a great story from a Smartling customer. A few years ago, we were working with an apparel company, a small apparel company that was US based. And they told me an anecdote that they recently got a support ticket from a customer who purchased, I think it was something like a sweatshirt in Germany. And they said this was one of the funniest support tickets they ever received, because the person reached out, and typically if you see order number, whatever, in a subject line, you're a little bit worried they're going to be asking for a refund. All this customer had to say was, I thought you were a shop down the road. I didn't figure it out until I saw your actual receipt was in English that was included in my package. It was pretty amazing, the content that you have on your website. And I actually bought from you because I thought you were a small company down the road. I was trying to buy local. So that goes back to Sonia's point about people looking to support people who are down the road. All right, I'll leave it there. And Ellie, I'll let you take it from here.
Cool, thanks, Ryan. So I'm Ellie. Good to meet you all. I work at a company called Constructor. We work with larger retailers, so places like Bonobos, Backcountry, Sephora. And what we do is we want to make sure that the products that people see on those sites are really relevant and attractive and personalized to them. And so you can imagine that localization plays a pretty big part in what we do because we have a lot of data on locale information that we can use to better personalize to those users. And as part of this, I wanted to kind of do a deep dive. I'd been wanting to, it's a little bit nerdy, but I'd been wanting to just find out about ice cream consumption across the world anyways. And this gave me an excuse to do it. So we're going to talk a little bit about ice cream. I hope that's okay. But before we do that, so the question that we're really trying to answer with localization, at least for constructors' purposes, is how do you personalize to somebody before you've met them? And the reason I'm phrasing it that way is that, like, after you already really know a person, knowing where they're from matters less and less, right? Like, you really, really know that person to a T. You know what their tastes are. Like Sonia gave this example of, you know, people in the Netherlands might like orange pants better. If I know somebody in the Netherlands and I happen to know already that, you know, they like blue pants and green pants, it doesn't really matter that people in general in the Netherlands like orange pants. But before I've met them, it's maybe not a bad assumption to say that they're a little bit a little bit more likely to enjoy orange pants because they're from the Netherlands. Similar thing, you know, if I'm working at a store, an apparel store, and I see somebody really big and tall walk in, I probably don't want to take them to the shirts that are only going to fit somebody that's a little bit shorter like me, right? Like if I know that they're shopping for their little brother or something like that, that might make more sense. But at first, when I first see them, before I've met them, what can I start personalizing based on? So a few things that tend to be helpful. You've got the weather, right? You can see this often if you walk into, I'll give another like apparel example, but then we'll talk about ice cream as well. People might be more likely to, if it's the winter and it's you know, very, very cold outside, you probably want a parka if you're looking for a jacket, something very, very large. If on the other hand, it's the summer and you're looking for a jacket, maybe it's just like a rain jacket or something like that. You can do this based off of the weather, the temperature, the weather. You can do this based off of where somebody regionally is from. The sky is kind of the limit in terms of what you can use, but the idea is it's information that you know about a person ahead of time, and what can you do with that information to start serving your users better. So an example, and if you don't mind going to the next slide. Kelsey, thank you. So I used ice cream as an example because it was the most delicious thing that I could think of, and I like delicious things. So what I wanted to find out was, when I was thinking of like, what is somebody going to be buying differently over the course of the year? Like, just because ice cream's cold, I figured that's probably a pretty good example. And I wanted to see just like how true that was. So I found a little bit of data. Actually found more data than this, but these were the two that I thought illustrated the problem, or illustrated the scenario the best. So on the left-hand side, you have ice cream consumption in Spain month by month. I believe this is in kilograms total. And so if you look at it in January versus July, you've got it about 15 times greater consumption in July compared to January. And when you think about that, it makes sense, right? Like, I probably want something to cool me down in the summer. Summer's pretty hot in Spain. I probably don't want something to cool me down in January. I'm already cold enough. I'm already wearing my winter jacket. But then so first of all, you can start localizing based on the month. But then if you look at this in Australia, in the Southern Hemisphere, the really interesting thing about this graph on the right is, or this chart on the right is, it's literally like the mirror image of the one on the left, right? When you think about that, that makes sense too, because June, July, August are the colder months in Australia. January, December, November, February, these are the warmer months. And so that month, January and December, which are in the Spanish case, the ones that have some of the least consumption of ice cream, in the Australian case, they're the ones that have the most consumption of ice cream. And so now how do you take that back to what you want to surface to users? Well, if I have a user that's searching for desserts, what do I want to show them? If I'm just looking for things that are generally relevant without taking anything else into account, like ice cream is always a good choice, cake is always a good choice. Those definitely match dessert. But now if I start taking localization, locale into account, I'm starting to look at what the weather is like, where somebody is from, what the temperature is like there. Now it's starting to change, right? If it's January, then I care. First of all, I care about what month it is. If it's January, then I also care about what locale they're from. If they're in Australia, then yeah, I want to show them more ice cream when they search for dessert. That seems like a great choice. If they're in Spain, I probably want to show them relatively less of that. Maybe something that's like a more cold weather dessert would be more appropriate. And that's something that I can know about the user before I've ever met them and start improving that experience to them, not knowing anything else about them. And if you go to the next slide, I kind of wanted to go one deeper. So it's not just about like, if you're taking ice cream as the example, like I thought that the two kind of facets that I was looking at before were a little bit simpler. So I wanted to see, are there even more fine-tuned regional differences? And flavors is actually a pretty good example of where you can find those. So I live in Seattle, in the US, and I have never in my life heard of Moose Tracks ice cream. Maybe some people listening on here have, I haven't. It's apparently the most popular flavor, and this is information coming from Instacart that has a bunch of really good data on this. It's apparently the most popular flavor in a bunch of middle American states. Would not have known that if I was searching for ice cream and somebody showed me Moose Tracks, like say like, that's interesting, that's a novelty, but it's probably not the thing that I'm gonna buy first. Funny enough, green tea is the most popular in Washington and also my favorite ice cream, but neither here nor there. Knowing where somebody is from on this regional basis, it helps me personalize to them even more. Right now, when somebody's searching for dessert and I know that it's the summer, it's warm out, it's the sort of month within wherever the person is located, that they're likely to go and buy ice cream, I'm not just going to be able to know to surface ice cream to them. I actually have a pretty good idea of which flavors should be the ones that I should surface to them. And so as we get more and more localized towards that goal of being hyper localized, we're getting better and better at personalizing to that person, of giving them that better experience. I think Sonia called it emotional content before, and I love that phrase. I hope it's all right if I use that. We want to give them that emotional content that's going to show them like, hey, this site really speaks to me. It's something that really gets me. It has the sort of thing that I want, especially within the area that we focus on at Constructor, search and product discovery. Being able to do that when you're searching and desserts could match on like 1,000 items. There's a lot that matches on it. Nobody's going to scroll to page 100 to actually find the stuff that you really care about. So giving them that hyper localized experience, so you can tell them even on page 1, I get what you mean, I have what you want. That's incredibly powerful. So next slide, please. So one way that we start to surface this information, and I think this is helpful just in general, like you can do this on your own. This is just our dashboard, but everybody has data like this. We went and we ambiguated some data from across all of our customers, and just a few interesting findings. Like a lot of this stuff, it's obvious in hindsight, but it's not something that you would think of ahead of time. So ice cream is something that I thought of ahead of time. I think probably if you ask people like, what's a localized thing? A lot of people would probably say ice cream first, or maybe I'm just weird. I don't know, one of those. But as you start to look at these, you start to see stuff like, surfboards are more popular in California versus other American states. That makes sense in hindsight. A lot of people surf in California. Even in San Francisco, where you would think that people wouldn't surf as much because it's cold, people still put on their wetsuits and they go surfing, so makes sense. Shortboards are a little bit more popular in Seattle. Snowboard bindings are more popular in California. We have a place called Tahoe there where a lot of people ski and snowboard, so that makes sense as well. But it's the sort of thing that I wouldn't have thought of ahead of time. And like the domain of how many things you could think of this way, it's just massive. It's like finding needles in haystacks. And so it's like, if you have something that's crunching this data, that's figuring it out automatically, that gives you a one up, it gives you a leg up on what you can actually surface to your users that give them that hyper localized experience. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the kind of question that all of this begs is, how much of this stuff should be manual versus automatic? When you give somebody that works in merchandising that sort of dashboard that I just showed you, their eyes are lighting up. They're like, cool, I can start to merchandise if my system supports it based off of all of these things, right? If somebody's going and they're looking for like outdoor gear, if they're in California, great, I'm going to show them more snowboard bindings. And I'm going to show them more surfboards. But if they're in Utah, maybe not Utah, but if they're in Iowa, probably those things don't make as much sense because there's no water nearby and there's no mountains. So on the flip side of that, automated systems, they can crunch way more data than a human, and they can do it much faster. And so being able to get to that information in the first place, having automated systems really helps. And then on top of crunching that data, good AI can start to surface localization that makes great sense in hindsight, but it's hard to think of when you're just thinking of it off the bat. Those great merchandising teams, they know their shoppers better than anyone else. They can look at two products with zero data and say, like, this one's going to be popular and probably sell well in America. And this other one over here, like maybe it's really popular in Germany. And so you've kind of got pros and cons on both sides. You've got benefits to both. So what's the answer? In our opinion, the answer is really you should make it a team sport. The majority of everything that you're doing, in our opinion, just because there's so much data that you really need to crunch, it should be based on the AI, right? A merchandise, like no matter how big your merchandising team is, they're not going to be able to surface all of the different kinds of localization that are possible. And one of the really interesting things as I'm talking about this also is a lot of the localization that is possible, it's not obvious even in hindsight. Like if somebody came up to me right now and said like earrings are more popular than bracelets in California, so maybe, I don't know, what does the data say? And if the data says that they're way more popular, then great, that's something that we should start surfacing to users and see how it works. And then the merchandiser's job becomes not to try to find every single one of those like billion examples where you can start to localize, but where can they manage by exception? Where can they go in and say like, there is a huge amount of room in this particular example. Maybe it's ice cream because a lot of people search for that. Maybe it's coats, whatever it is, but like, this is the one where you've surfaced a bunch of really good data to me about how I can localize. And now I'm going to go really, really deep. And the machine learning, that on the other hand, that's the thing that goes broad. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So finally, what can you localize based on? I get this question often because I use the same few examples all the time, but really like the sky's the limit. There's so much information that you can find out about a user. I mean, like we talked about weather, we talked about regional preferences, per capita income. Could you use that? Yeah, sure. If you know where a person is located, you can figure out the per capita income. And does that tell you something about whether they're likely to buy luxury goods or something that's a little bit economical? What about, the person's browser? Like if somebody is on a really old Windows XP machine and they're using Internet Explorer 5 or something like that, versus if somebody is on a brand new Mac and they're using the very, very latest version of Chrome or a niche browser like Brave, like what does that tell you about their preferences? You've never met the person, but you can start localizing to them based off of that stuff immediately. With that said, and this is kind of like a general theme for everything that we do at Constructor, at least, be careful when you're doing this stuff, because good localization, like all good personalization, it should have the user in mind first. You see a lot of privacy laws that are coming into play right now. And the thing that I have really, really strong conviction on is those privacy laws, they're not to combat places like Netflix or Spotify that are just trying to give you better music and better movies. That stuff actually benefits the user. It's that emotional content that speaks to the user. It's good for them. It's something that people actually want. What those privacy laws are to combat is places like a Facebook that is going to go and abuse your data, and they're going to show ads everywhere. And like, it's not good. It's not pleasant for you. No user wants that. And so as you're thinking about how are you localizing to your user, make sure that you have the user in mind and you're using it not just to make an extra buck, but to give them a better experience. That at the end of the day, like, that's the sort of localization, that's the sort of the personalization that's going to win out. And so really, like, if I'm leaving you folks with anything, with great power comes great responsibility. There's a lot of data that's available here. There's a lot of automated systems that can crunch that data for you. There's a lot of AI that's now capable of using that crunch data to start localizing, personalizing to your users. Shameless pitch, Constructor does a lot of that stuff if you're interested. But as you start to do that stuff, make sure that you're doing it for the user's benefit. Don't just be doing it to make an extra buck. Make your users happy getting a localized experience. Make them happier that they came to you and they're getting that localized experience, and they build more of that trust. If we can build trust with somebody even like Sonia's dad from beforehand, then we know we're doing a good job.
All right, thank you, everyone. I am back. We didn't have any questions submitted to the Q&A, so we'll just hang for a minute if any other questions come through. Otherwise, we will wrap up.
I'm just really in the mood for ice cream now.
I know.
I know, and it's so late here.
I've been eating more of it while studying this stuff.
Good excuse.
All right, well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and thank you, Ryan and Sonia and Ellie, for speaking. Really appreciate it, and see everyone soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you
everybody.
for having me. Bye, everyone.
Bye.